Hi, my name is Judy Vankooiman, and you're watching Life Issues. This month's show is about Pine Street Inn, and my guest is Ed Cameron from the Pine Street Inn. Welcome, Ed.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Ed, I'm going to start. What is your professional background?
So I've been working with homeless people and on behalf of homeless people for quite a while now. I first got my feet wet in this field working at Pine Street back in the 1980s. I started in 1987. A couple of years out of college, I'd worked for restaurants and for a bookstore. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Saw an ad for a part-time job working 11 at night to 7 in the morning at Pine Street Inn, and got my foot in the door, and it had an impact on me right away, and I felt like I could also, add value and have an impact. But just working with homeless individuals was always very interesting and challenging. I was at Pine Street for a number of years back then. I still feel like a young whippersnapper, but I realize I'm getting up there a little bit. And I've had other experiences working with Mayor Menino in the city of Boston on homelessness and hunger-related issues. Worked on behalf of homeless children at Horizons for Homeless Children. I've been at Community Teamwork in Lowell, that was more housing, but also family homelessness, and also some time at Housing Families in Malden, trying to help. That was, again, mostly focused on families. And I came back to Pine Street now almost 4.5 years ago. So I had a 7-year career there in the beginning, and I came back after 24 years. And a lot of changes, but a lot of things are still similar. Pine Street's doing a lot more housing now, which is great, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I've been doing it for a while, so that's the professional part of my background. On the side, I'm also a city councilor in Newburyport, so I get to work on fixing potholes and taking care of neighborhood concerns and things like that. So that's kind of an interesting. We're trying to do some more housing, affordable housing in Newburyport, so it kind of ties in with the work I've done professionally, but that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, Newburyport is very nice.
Nice
very
place. It's just like Winthrop.
Yes, thank you. And what is your title?
My title is Senior Director of Outreach and Triage, so those are two programs at Pine Street that we can talk a little bit about. Outreach is the staff that work with people that are unsheltered, so on the streets of Boston, both daytime and nighttime. And Triage is a program where those are the staff that meet with somebody when they first come into shelter, and we really try to even work so they don't have to come into shelter, that there might be some alternative, family or friends that the person could stay where there's something that we can help mediate and cobble together, because shelter is a tough experience, I think, all around. But those are the two programs that I work with.
Okay, great. And you had mentioned that you, this second time around, that you've been at Pine Street for almost 5 years?
Yeah, I think 4.5 at this point, yeah.
Nice, nice. And can you give us a little history of Pine Street?
Yeah, so the Pine Street Inn, I think it's probably the most well-known shelter in Massachusetts and maybe New England. We've been around since 1969, and it actually started on Pine Street in Chinatown. And there's still a Pine Street in Chinatown. The building is not there, but it was in a Chinese evangelical church, and part of that church was used just to take care of street people. I think the phrase back in the day was skid row alcoholics, and so it was tended to be men, although there were some women, but folks that would be certainly dealing with alcoholism, and needed a place to stay. And it was small back in 1969. Over time, it did grow, and it became more formalized as a nonprofit organization. And I believe it was 1981. Pine Street moved just down the street and further into the south end of Boston, and we've been in that location since 1981. And if you drive by on the highway, you can still see the old Boston Fire Department fire tower. Looks just like the tower in Florence, Italy, or in Provincetown, if you're familiar with that. So it's sort of an Italianate tower. It's actually quite striking. And we've been in there with shelter and other programs now, both for men and women. Originally, it was pretty much for men. But we've been there, and over time, as I've mentioned, we really are trying to shift our focus from sheltering which we think is important for health and safety, but really we want to help people get into housing. And so over the years, we've developed our own housing, and we've got 850 units, mostly in Boston, a little bit in Brookline, a little bit of programming in Chelsea as well. So we're trying to become, yes, a homeless agency, but more of a housing agency than a sheltering agency. But we still do the basics just to make sure people are safe and okay.
Okay, and what is the mission of Pine Street?
So the mission, and we have a mission statement that we go over with every new employee, and it really is to develop a partnership with, not to. We don't tell homeless individuals what to do. We really try to, let them know we're on their side, try to understand their story. So there's a partnership with a homeless individual to help them move from the streets or shelter into permanent housing of their own. That is simply the mission. We have several programs that do that. Again, we have the street programs, but also sheltering, and then within shelter, we've got housing placement staff that help people, do applications to housing authorities and for other sorts of permanent supportive housing. We have mental health clinicians, we have substance abuse treatment, we have workforce development. So we have a lot of ways that we do it, but that's, all of that is, again, we want to get you from A, the shelter or the streets, to B, your own house, so you can kind of get your life back together and get more stability in your life.
That's great. And what is the vision of Pine Street? Yeah,
the vision, and for a long time I always got confused between what's the mission and what's the vision, and that seems like they sound the same.
Yeah.
And the vision is sort of, what is on the horizon, what are you striving for, what are you going to walk 50 miles to get to on the horizon. And for us, the vision is really to have people in their own home in a community. And community can be many different things. It could be a connection with the fellow residents now in the place that they live, or with the neighborhood, or reconnecting with family and friends. So it's all about a permanent home for everyone and in community of some sort. So that's our vision. That's what we're pushing for, and we do it one person at a time. But we're able to do it for hundreds of people each year, so that's really what we're aiming for.
Okay, great. And what is the values?
Yeah, we have, there are 4 values, and I shouldn't say that because I'll probably forget one, but community is one of our values, so really kind of establishing a rapport with the people that we're working with, in our shelters or in our homes. Community also means connecting with our neighbors in the neighborhoods that we're in, because we're in 30 different locations with our housing, all different neighborhoods of Boston. So there's community. Teamwork is a part of it, because we work really closely together across different departments, and we have lots of external stakeholders and other service providers that we work with. Accountability, where we hold ourselves to pretty high standards in terms of our goals for helping people move out of shelter or off the streets. And then lastly, it's really respect. There's a phrase that I first heard at Pine Street, and that is many years ago, and it's, we're going to meet people where they're at. So we don't have any preconceived notion about, what happened to somebody or where they're going or what their life entailed. We really want to learn, understand where they're at, not have expectations that they can do more or less, but really just try to be with them in that moment. And I think also meeting people where they're at doesn't mean leaving them where they're at, right? It's trying to, like, hey, you've been on the streets for a couple of years. Are you interested in housing? And oftentimes people are reluctant for that kind of change, and they may have a lot going on mental health or substance use wise, and we just try to cajole people, not force people into choices that we think they should make, but just to kind of talk to them about their options. And if you had your own room, we can help you with food, you'll have some peace and quiet, you can sleep, you can imagine people sleeping on the street. You don't get 8 solid hours, you're probably getting, 30 minutes here or there. And, as I've gotten older, I realize how important sleep is. And but people to have their own home can provide a little bit of a step up where people can do better. So it's really all about that respect and just trying to, again, meet people where they're at, and like, hey, are you interested in housing? We could help you with that. So that's really what our values are all about.
Okay, great. And can you please tell us about the programs that are offered?
Yeah, so we have a range, and again, starting with meeting people on the street if that's where they're at, and the numbers in Boston, they've been pretty consistently high. And I'll say one thing about Boston: the services that the city provides with the state, and we also use federal dollars as well, and we really rely on philanthropy and private donations to quite a large degree. We're able to get it so that as much as the number of people on the streets in Boston is not good, it can be anywhere from 100 to a couple hundred, several hundred a night that might be out there. And we're out with 2 vans every night of the year, and we have been for at this point almost 37 years. We have 3 staff in each van, and they'll go around. They'll just check in with people, get their names, get their information, make sure we're connecting with our daytime staff, who then tries to get them off the streets. But the numbers are, they are significant, but they're a lot better than pretty much every other city in the U.S., I have to say. We have a fair amount of shelter capacity in Boston. Again, that's a credit to the city and the state. In places like New York City, San Francisco, LA, where there are huge encampments, and Phoenix, Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine also has a problem as well. I think it's really teetering out of control. It's not great in Boston. There are certain things that are going on now that we can talk about a little later. But that outreach, that's sort of the beginning of our programs. We have sheltering for men and women, several different locations, and again, really trying to get people through our housing placement programs. Hey, let's sit down and do this online application at the Boston Housing Authority, or you're really from wherever, Framingham, you're from Brockton, you're from Quincy, would you be interested in moving back there and working with people, trying to find a way for them to get back to their community of origin? So those are part of what we do. Workforce development, we've got a housekeeping and food services training programs. A fair amount of our folks are dealing with mental health issues, so trying to get people into treatment, seeing a doctor, a psychiatrist, medication if that's warranted, so they can do better for themselves. And then again, the housing piece, that's, we built our own because it wasn't getting built otherwise. So those 850 units, that's 850 people that used to be on the streets or in shelter a couple of years ago, or, we're moving in people, not every day, but pretty much every week we're getting several people, into those housing opportunities. And that's, so those are sort of the programs. And we do have, certainly a need for volunteers and donors, and we have staff that work, connecting people with donor and volunteer opportunities as well.
Okay, great. And what does Pine Street do in the winter for the homeless?
Yeah, it gets a little more intense, obviously, and our outreach van, when it started back in 1986, it started because somebody died 3 or 4 blocks away in cold weather, who was probably trying to get back to shelter, but there were no services out there. So there's definitely an intensification of our street outreach. Again, we've got the 2 vehicles that go out. They may see 80 in the summer. They may see 80 to 100 people at night. In the winter, it's fewer. It can be 40 to 50 because it's so cold. Once it's cold, people either they go into shelter or they find, hey, their friend or family that'll take them in, because it definitely is more dangerous in the cold. So we'll intensify that. And anytime there's in the recent hurricane and some of the heat waves, we've had more staff out. In the winter, obviously, that gets dangerous with hypothermia and frostbite. So we'll be out there more. Our shelter staff will let pretty much everybody in, and sometimes there are people that might have had a fight or something go on in shelter, and they've been suspended from shelter. But once the weather's really bad, we just let people in, and we try to keep it safe. But we will, if our beds are too full, we'll accommodate people on mats or on chairs in the winter. Some of the other shelters do this as well. We have what we call a warming center, so we don't want somebody to be outside. And a floor is not great on a mat or a chair, but it's better than being outside. So we'll take those measures. And again, we're mostly Boston-based, and I will say a lot of the folks that are sheltered in Boston or on the streets of Boston, they are from other parts of Massachusetts as well. But we've got very close connections with the city, and you know, the mayor and the mayor's office of housing will work with us to get word out and notify the police. The police will be keeping an eye for people. The MBTA transit police will keep an eye out for people in the different MBTA and commuter rail stations and connect with us if somebody needs to come in. So it really is kind of an all hands on deck in the winter, just for pure safety.
And I've heard that once a year that there are organizations that go out at night once a year to do a count. Can you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, that was initiated by the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department many years ago, and it's an attempt to get what's called a point-in-time count. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but there's a window of a couple of nights, again, across the whole country, and every area gets included in this somehow, and somebody will be responsible in that area. And in Boston, it is the city of Boston, but it happens elsewhere in Massachusetts as well, where you'll get a count of how many people were in shelter or transitional programs, so they're homeless and have nowhere to go. And they'll usually volunteers and service providers will go out at night. In Boston, it starts around 11:30. And typically on a Tuesday night, just because there's not as much, you know, you go out on a Friday or Saturday night, you'll have, you know, in Boston for sure, people, you know, hitting bars and clubs and whatnot. But on a Tuesday night or a Monday night, there's fewer foot traffic, so it's a little easier to tell who's who. And you know, we'll always check in with people. Are you okay tonight? But try to, you know, get their name and just do a pure count. So it's considered a census. Happens once a year, and again, all the same time, so that the federal government can kind of see things going up or going down in certain communities. And it's a way to get a bit of a benchmark.
Do you give them any kind of blankets or water or socks?
Yeah, all that, and we'll also, and again, we're a little unusual in Boston because Pine Street, we're out there every night anyway, but we'll have some extra vehicles out there. The city's Public Health Commission will have some vehicles out. Because on that night, we're trying to see everybody in one night. Usually Pine Street, we don't see everybody every night, but we'll see maybe half of the people that are out there. But yeah, certainly lots of blankets, food, clothing, but also a ride into shelter if that's something that people want. And we do that in the winter anyway. But this way, there's lots of people out there looking and trying to find folks. And yeah, it's amazing where you'll find people, you know, on the waterfront and business areas, down alleys, under the Mass Pike tunnels underneath the Prudential. People really kind of squirrel away to places where they feel safe and want to be left alone. But you know, it's kind of human resiliency is quite amazing. It's unfortunate that people don't have a place to be, but you know, you'll find people setting up in all sorts of strange places.
What is front door triage?
So that's the program that, you know, if the shelter is, you know, the building or you know, a location, a structure, how do you get into the structure? Well, you get in through the front door. And so front door triage, they're the staff who will meet with everybody that's newly homeless. So somebody comes walking down our alley for our men's shelter, or they walk into our women's shelter, or if they call, we're getting a lot more phone calls the last couple of years. I think COVID kind of changed things, but you know, it's, you know, hey, my name's Ed, and I don't have a place to go tonight. Do you have space for me? And the front door triage staff are the people that have what we call a problem-solving conversation. And we're not trying to get like in depth with somebody's life, but like, what's going on right now? Where have you been staying? Have you looked at any other options for, you know, can you stay with your sister a little bit longer? Can you go stay with this friend? Are you sure your landlord wants you out? Could we talk to your landlord and try to mediate something? And could we help out with, you know, if you need, you know, a couple $100 to like tide over your landlord, you know, we're open to those sort of approaches. So front door triage really is trying to just make sure we don't want shelter to be the default. We'd rather have people try to, you know, stay out of shelter, and we'll connect them to services so they can work on the things they need to need to fix. But it's really all about that. And it's also a welcome, because a lot of the folks, we are able to divert them. That's our phrase for what we do, and a lot of that is family and friends. Somebody, I'm just too embarrassed to ask my sister, and I think most of our lives we've all kind of either experienced that ourselves, or we know family or friends who've gone through challenging times. So there can be quite a bit of stigma in that, and we just try to, well, this could be the way you could talk to that person, and maybe they can put you up for a little bit, and we'll try something else so you don't have to come into shelter. So those are the conversations. But if somebody does have to come into shelter, we've been pretty tight capacity-wise lately, but we certainly want people to be safe, and we'll welcome them in and sort of give them the rundown of how things work, just so that they feel okay and safe.
Okay. And what does the emergency shelter entail?
So it's we have 4 sites. Our men's is in the south end. That's 245 men can stay there at night, and a women's program next door it's separate, but it's next door for 81 women. We also have a shelter called Holy Family in Dorchester, which is 45 or 47 capacity, and kind of a unique model. We have a shelter, and have had one for quite a while, out at the Shattuck campus out in Jamaica Plain, and that is what's considered a low threshold program, and that's a place where you can go in and out, at night. The other shelters, it's like once you're in, you can't pop out at 11 o'clock and then come back. But I'll talk about the low threshold in a second. And shelter, yeah, it's pretty much the basics. People don't have a lot of control over their lives. We're dealing with pretty large groups. So for the men, they may be sleeping in a dorm with 30 or 40 other men. There's we do have security. Just from time to time, there have been incidents of violence, and we want to make sure there's no weapons in the building. But people get to eat, get dinner, get their meals, and just kind of hang out in the lobbies if that's what they want to do. We've got limited storage, so people aren't really able to bring a lot of belongings in, which is unfortunate. But that's sort of the capacity we have space-wise. And there's no time limit, and we have had people that have been there for quite a while, but we are able to get hundreds of people housed every year. Women's program's similar. It's a little smaller, and it's definitely got I think a more homey feel, I guess. And we don't want it to be home. We want to get people into homes, but we do have a nice atmosphere in the women's inn for them. And there's a little more privacy, a little more storage. And the shelter in Dorchester is in the basement of a church. And that's a quieter place. Our 2 main shelters, the men's inn and the women's inn, they are somebody could come if they're under the influence of a substance, so alcohol or other drugs. But at Holy Family, that's not allowed. That's part of a neighborhood agreement from years ago. So that's our 3rd shelter. And the 4th one we have is for men at the Shattuck, and that's a low threshold. It kind of connects to what's happening on Mass Ave and Melnia Cass in Boston, where there's, certainly homelessness is a factor, but there is, a lot of drug use. They are open drug use, and it's, in order to get some of those people off the street and out of tents. A couple of winters ago, Mayor Wu worked with the state and opened up these different low threshold programs. And low threshold means that, we just try to make it easy for people to come in, and people that are using drugs will have a different kind of schedule. I mean, they will need to go in and out, and so typical your general shelters, you can't go in and out. So we try to make it so there's medical staff on site. People can't use on site, but we know people are using. And just trying to, it's definitely a harm reduction model. We want to keep you safe. Sort of the old school approach is like, well, we're not going to tolerate this behavior, so don't do it here, and we're not going to let you in. And then people are going out and doing those behaviors and dying when there's nobody around. This is, we're going to acknowledge that, you've got a problem. We want you to stay connected to us so we can help you, either get into treatment or other housing options. And there's a concept called Housing First that says, let's just get the person in housing and then we'll work with them on everything else. And I do think, for somebody that's in the throes of addiction, whatever the substance or substances may be, if you've got your own four walls in your own room and privacy, that's going to make it easier for you to make some changes in your life and connect to, whether it's different recovery programs or AA or find a way forward. So that's really our shelter. So we have four different locations, but that's how we operate those.
Okay. And how can people get involved?
Yeah, so I think people getting involved, it has a couple of different facets to it. If somebody, watching the program is experiencing homelessness or has a family or friend that is, you can certainly reach out. And I think just going to our website is going to get you aimed in the right directions, which is Pine Street Inn, all one long word, .org. So pinestreetin.org. And you can poke around and you'll be able to find a number to call. That could be our shelter or triage number. And again, Winthrop's a little bit outside of our area, but we could certainly at least provide direction to somebody. So, I think one way to be involved is if somebody needs help or needs to understand services themselves. And, in terms of helping our cause, we're always looking for volunteers, and we're certainly always looking for donors. So you can find a volunteer page and a donor page on our website. As I referenced earlier, we're heavily reliant on both. And donations, or volunteering could be coming in and serving a meal, helping with a facilities project, cleaning up one of our homes, painting a place where people are living, doing some of that sort of work. Clothing drives, sock drives, coat drives, those sort of things are always part of what we need. And on the donation side, about a quarter of our funding does come from private donors, and a lot of that are small donors who could help us out with $25 a year or $10 a month. Pine Street, back in the day was really reliant on folks who just gave small donations, but there were so many of them that supported us. A lot of times church groups will get involved as well, so that is always welcome. And I think just another way to be involved also, we're a nonprofit and we're part of the private nonprofit side of the response to homelessness, but just asking your elected officials to be supportive on housing in particular, right? I think there's a sort of an overgeneralization that somebody that's homeless has, a mental health problem, a substance use problem, and that's sort of the beginning and end of it. But the reality is we're in a very challenging, and have been for many decades, housing market. It's expensive. So I think trying to get your elected official to help out creating more housing is super important.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, but that's all the time that we have.